This is episode 60 of the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. Welcome to episode 60 of the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. The current date is April 3rd, and the world sure has become a different place. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach on this intro before we get to today's guest. Firstly, I wanted to ask for your help to spread some reason around the community. If we take a look at the nature of what's been going on of this virus that's going on, the current information we have suggests that this is going to be around for the long haul. There is no more containing it. It is out. Any sort of measure that we do to flatten the curve will likely just be reversed once we resume regular operations. Now, I would love for somebody to correct me if I'm wrong here. I'd love to hear the other side of this. That's the whole point. But what we really do need to do is we need to start challenging what we're hearing from our politicians, because so far to me, I've heard no real plan to resume society. And the challenge with that is we don't really have the greatest economic situation at the moment in terms of the amount of debt we have. There are a lot of small business owners that really don't have the ability to go without being paid for more than a couple of months at a time. So there's so many businesses out there that I really care about, and I know you would too. Food places that we like to go to, a vegan cupcake place that we like to go to. And these are important. They're part of our culture. They're part of what makes Canada so great. And what's happening right now with the constant printing of money in our economy is they're basically watering down the pool. We've got less production. So if you think about economics, supply and demand, we've got less production of goods right now because everybody's staying at home, and we have more money circulating in the system because governments are printing cash. Ultimately, what that's going to do is create inflation. It's going to make it harder to buy things with the dollars that we have, and of course create a certain sense of entitlement to the people who are getting paid to not work. Not that that's the biggest concern. What we really need is we need people out there creating value. So I challenge you to challenge those around you to think more about what makes sense and what doesn't. In my mind, we need a productive decision to be made that's going to allow people to get back to work, get back to being productive. We have the ability to take extensive action. In my opinion, and this is just an idea that I have that I think could work, is knowing that this is probably going to become our common flu, which seems like it's trending that way. And again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong. Knowing that it's part of our society going forward, we now need to find a way to be working towards dealing with it. So we should have factories opening up and retooling to produce ventilators, beds. We should be building temporary hospitals. We should be training military-style medics that can treat this virus. This is just an idea I have, but I think it would work, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too. But what we need to do is we need to be communicating these ideas to our local MPs, our local politicians, to start making a difference. We cannot sit idly by. This is supposed to be a government for the people, by the people, and so far it's a bunch of people waiting for the government to solve the problem, which just doesn't work. And I've got to tell you, Canada's a free country. I've always been proud to live here. I unfortunately had to go to the States this past week, and when I returned to Canada, I've never felt more like my freedoms were abused and taken away from me. We have a property that we like to go to, owned by my mother-in-law. It's just a field, 100 acres, where we like to take our dog for a walk. We were told that we were not allowed to leave our house, and we would be fined up to $1 million or thrown in jail for up to 3 years if we were caught leaving our home. And unfortunately, that's a freedom that is just not acceptable to give up. That is not a solution. We would not be hurting anybody. So far, I've just witnessed more and more of our freedoms being taken away, and it's up to us as citizens of our country and our American friends alike to stand up to this and force governments to have a plan to resume activity. And I know that's hard, but we have to realize that this is war. It's not a war on a foreign battlefield. This is a war right in our own countries that's challenging us. It's a war on a virus. It's a war on an inefficient government. And not to get political here, it doesn't really matter which leader you support. They are accountable to us, and we are accountable to them to provide and push with solutions. I know that's not what you're probably expecting from me now, but this is a concerned citizen who does have an audience, and I want to speak to you, and I want to share with you my concerns, because the reason I got into real estate investing is for the economics, for the reasons I thought it was such a great thing, and the ways that it helps both Canadians and Americans alike to create wealth so that we have something to retire on. And if we want to protect that dream, if we want to protect our economy and our currency, we need to make a change. We need to hold our governments accountable to make a change. And so far, it seems like they're just more and more intent on locking us down more and more as a very gradual procedure, which is really textbook for implementing changes. They do it slowly so that we resist less. And I hate seeing it happen. I'm not on board with it, guys. And I really hope you aren't either. I want to see us return to a prosperous society, one that we can all be proud of. So please spend some time thinking, challenge others around you to think about this and not just parrot what you're hearing from the media. The whole stay at home thing doesn't work. Sure, we can stay at home for a brief period of time if there is a very specific action plan and outcome and end date, but currently there is not. So be very careful with that. And guys, make sure that you're not ever willing to give up a freedom. It's a slippery slope and it's not one we can afford to go down. Okay, so now after that, let's get into today's episode. We have Quentin D'Souza on the show. Quentin is an exceptional real estate investor out of the Durham region of Ontario, which is east of Toronto. He's actually the very first one that I've had on the show from east of Toronto, and sure, I'm glad I got the big fish. So Quentin started the Durham REI meetup group. He is worth several $1 million and counting, and he's done an exceptional job. He has an exceptional following, and when this guy talks, people listen. I have copies of his books here. So we've got The Ultimate Wealth Strategy. We have the Filling Vacancies Toolbox and the Property Management Toolbox. I haven't read any of those yet, but I will be getting to that eventually. Quentin's a wealth of knowledge. And if you haven't heard of him, now's the time to look him up. Quick note about rent for April 1st. As I suspected, things did go relatively smoothly for me. I only had one tenant out of about 30 that pay me, not pay. And it looks like we'll be getting that money coming in about a week's time. Overall, I feel that my strategy of not reaching out ahead of time and giving the idea of non-payment of rent out was the better move for me. Everyone has their own solution. I don't think there's one right one. You really just have to take the approach that makes sense for you. And fortunately, this one worked out. So without further ado, let's get into today's discussion with Quentin D'Souza. Hello and welcome to the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. I have Quentin D'Souza on the show. You might recognize that name from the Durham REI, but Quentin, thanks for making the very long drive from the east end of Toronto.
Yeah, I thought you were closer. I didn't realize
You might not have committed to this if you realized just how far it would be. Well, I'm glad you made the long trek down. And for those who aren't familiar with you already, Quentin, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, okay. So I'm out in the Durham region, so I focus investing out from Pickering all the way up to Northumberland, so to Coburg. I've been investing for 15 years. I've gone through, correction. I've been able to withstand that and continue investing. I'm a full-time investor since 2014. I have a master's in education. I was a teacher beforehand, and I left teaching at about 40, and haven't looked back since. And got rid of the golden handcuffs, and just continued to do what I'm doing now full time, and run the Durham Real Estate Investor Club and do some coaching as well.
Nice. So yeah, and I had interviewed you before, and I remember you said you were a high school teacher, was it? Or
I taught elementary school as well as early high school, and by the end I was a consultant. I worked at the board level. I was working with educators, creating curriculum as well, and had a lot of fun there. So at the board level, it was neat, and I was going towards, I have my principal qualifications, so I was going towards that. Right. Just wasn't the direction I wanted to end up being in. So yeah,
you really switched gears.
Yeah.
So you said you started at 40 being full time, or you started investing at 40?
No, 40. I started investing. I guess that would. So 15 years ago.
15 years ago, you started investing?
2005.
Okay. And then you became full-time, what year would that put us at?
6 years ago, so 2014.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And for context, what does your portfolio look like right now?
The portfolio is some single families from when I got started, duplex conversions up to 12 unit buildings. So, and everything in between. So we're approaching 25 million in assets.
25 million. Okay. So that's a pretty solid portfolio. Are you mostly doing that on your own, or do you have a partner in there with you?
No, we have partners on a lot of different projects. I've been, wrote the book on buy, fix, refinance, rent, and often called the BRRRR strategy. But I been doing that for a long time, and so that's been the main strategy. I flipped a dozen houses in a year. I've done rent-to-owns. I've done some wholesaling. I've done a bunch of different stuff. Now I'm focused on small apartment buildings. We're buying between 6 and 20 unit apartment buildings, doing the same thing as we used to do on the smaller 1, 2, 3, 4 units, but doing it on the buildings. And it takes a little bit longer, but the strategy is the same.
Okay, and we're gonna dig right into that. I want to specifically focus on the multis,
right.
But before we do that, so Quentin passed me 3 books here that he is the author of, and so I've already talked about the Ultimate Wealth Strategy. So for those who haven't watched episode, I believe it's 29 with Jeff Woods, co-authored this book with you, and then you've got 2 others. You've got the Property Management Toolbox. A how-to guide for Ontario real estate investors and landlords. So I'll hold that one up here and I'll put those in the show notes. And then the Filling Vacancies Toolbox, a step-by-step guide for Ontario real estate investors and landlords for renting out residential real estate. So you've been busy. Are these recent or?
No, I've had them for a while, actually, 2014, 2015. But the thing is, running the Durham Real Estate Investor Club, I had a lot of questions around property management and filling vacancies. And so instead of answering all those questions all the time repetitively, it was easier to have the book or the books to help them to manage properties themselves, as well as when I originally wrote it, it was supposed to be for my wife to, if something were to happen to me, this is what you can do to manage the properties if you choose to do the management side of things. And so that was the essence of writing the property management and the filling vacancies book. Now I get comments all the time about those books, just being practical and from a self-management perspective. I don't recommend self-management for everybody, but it's a good to understand, and at least for your first property, at least go through the process so you get a good understanding of it, because otherwise you won't be able to, give feedback to a property manager who is working for you, right?
Such a good discussion. And I actually just gave a presentation on this the other night saying, pros and cons, self-manage versus manage. When you have a management company in place, you're not directly in control.
Right.
And if you don't understand it, if you don't understand what your property management company is doing, then you're not able to react. And I actually have been in a situation where I was fired by a property management company. They fired me as a client, and I didn't even have my tenants' names. I didn't, I had spotty leases. I usually had those for financing purposes, but I didn't have their names, emails, and all that stuff. Fortunately, they were nice enough to give me all that stuff. But, imagine things went sour with a management company and you didn't have, your tenant's info. It could be really messy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There's so many things. So I kind of equate it just like renovations. Like when you're doing renovations, it's not like you need to know how to tape drywall, but you kind of need to know roughly how it's done. You don't need to do it yourself. Yeah. But if you understand all the pieces that go into renovating a house, then you could technically general contract it yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, also there's there's an evolution to the process to things, right? When you start off, you may have one property and manage that and it's okay. But you start to get to a scale where, you're creating a business and you need to outsource a part of it so that you can continue to do something else. Yeah. And then eventually, you may bring property management back in-house. So when we get to the scale that we're working at, we're looking at, or we have property management in-house, which is a different type of scale. And everybody evolves in different ways. And the thing is too, is that the challenge a lot of people have is so when you started to, what was your first job?
My first job, I well, when I was 14 years old, I guess I had little things for my mom. I had a home business when I was like 10, 12.
Yeah.
But you mean my first like official go to work and have a pay card?
Yeah.
That would be like 14 years old.
Yeah. And what like
dishwashing.
Yeah. So when I did the same thing. Like, I mean, I had landscaping businesses, but I was a dishwasher and I made like $5 an hour or something like that. Right. At this old Greek restaurant was a lot of fun. But like what happens is you get into a mindset when you get started with an hourly type of wage, right? And there are two different types of economies. There's the economy that's an hourly economy where, everybody kind of, a lot of people start in where they are right now. And then there's the results-based economy, which is where it's based on what you do and your successes. And that's where real estate can be for people, but where a lot of people are and where they start from is this hourly, mindset. And it's hard for them to bridge from getting to the results-based from the hourly-based. And that's what I find the challenges when it comes to property management or, renovations or all of that. Like they're stuck in the, okay, it would cost me $10 an hour to do this, and I'll get it done that way. And then, you can, you always want to be on those tasks that are your most successful. And this is an evolution of thought for me too, like moving from, making $20 or $50 an hour to like $100 or $1,000 an hour tasks, like finding joint venture partners, right? Finding new projects. Those are the big tasks that, really can generate a lot. But it's even more than that. It's moving past that hourly thought and going into the results base. What does it mean to have a new little business, which is my apartment building? And what kind of results can I get from that? And it's not an hourly thing. It's almost like a net worth changing thing.
Oh yeah,
it's
absolutely.
like a life-changing thing for a lot of people if you can do multiple of those, right?
Yeah.
And and you look at where a lot of people are in the scope of investment properties. Most people never get to more than like 3 investment properties, and that's fine. That's part of where they are. Like 80% of the real estate investors you do a survey. You have your event coming up tonight, right?
Yeah.
You do your survey. I would say that 80% of the room will have 1 to 3 properties. That'll be it. And then you'll have the 20% of the room that have the same amount of properties as all of the 80% combined as one person. Okay. And then that's just the way it works. But then that person is creating a business, right? And they've gone from that hourly wage thought pattern to this is the results-based thought pattern. And there are always going to be people like that. And you want to be around people like that in your life and in the room that you're in, right?
So funny that you say that, because it doesn't really matter what number people put in front of an hour for my time. It never feels like enough. I'm like, no, it just feels 30. I don't feel right about that.
Yeah.
I don't feel right about it. I want to be paid based on results. I like the quote, and I don't remember who. It might be Robert Kiyosaki, but work for free, get paid for nothing. So I'd rather work to build assets and get paid absolutely nothing while I'm doing it, and then enjoy the benefits of that for the rest of my life than I would work to get a paycheck. Yeah. And probably so much so that it's to my detriment sometimes, because like I won't really do much like in the way of like trying to create active income sometimes. I'll just be like, no, I want to renovate my own projects, do BRRRRs, but you have to keep a certain amount for mortgage qualifications and all this fun stuff. So
actually I brought an interesting graph on that. Now I don't know how we're going to do this, but it's the hockey stick diagram. Have you ever seen that? Let me see if I can put that up there.
Yeah, here, I'll hold it up in front of this one. I can certainly while you speak, I'll do it. So
actually, like I put a bunch of these, like some of my graphs over at Durham REI on the blog there, so you can see it. So what happens, and I learned this from a really great real estate investor friend of mine, and basically, a lot of people, when they're building their portfolio of properties, they, in the first, they let's say they do the buy, fix, refinance, rent, or BRRRR, right? And they get that initial lift and they get the charge. And then, a year or two later, or 2 or 3 years later, maybe they've got, $40,000 or $50,000 in equity in the property. And they're like, well, what do I do? I'm going to take that equity and I'm just going to sell the property and I'm going to hold it, right? Because they're scared. And so they end up selling at the base of the hockey stick. So they never really get past that where the big growth happens in their asset base, right? And they end up selling it really early, and then they always end up in that 1 to 3 kind of area.
They don't allow themselves to grow far enough.
Yeah, that's right. So they've taken the money off the table already, and not looking at the bigger picture.
I remember watching one of the properties I bought in 2011. I closed the start of 2012, and I had these 2 properties that I bought, and in 2011, start of 2012, and they were both like, they just didn't move in price. Like, I was looking at them in 2015, they were still worth the same, and I was like, why hasn't it gone up at all? Like, it was in London, so nothing was really growing in London at that time.
Right.
And then finally, just like that hockey curve, everything exploded. And my property, I bought it for 187.5. And it ended up recently, I got it appraised about a year and a half ago for $315. And I bet if I appraised it now, it'd probably be worth, maybe even $390. And it's funny because for the first 3 years I owned it, it barely moved at all. In fact, if I had sold it, I probably would have broke even after paying the legal fees. Right. But then it just exploded. You never know when the market will change and you'll get that astronomical growth, which we're in right now. Like we're sort of in the housing crisis. I don't think people are calling it that, but I'm calling it that. Yeah. We're seeing it across Ontario right now.
For sure. And the thing is too, in the GTA in particular, if you're looking at, what's happened, every 10 to 12 years, we've been getting a doubling of the asset value, right? So it continues to increase, every 10 to 12 years. And it's been doing that since 1970. Right. So if you look at it, if you take it and bring it back now, it doesn't happen in all markets, and it doesn't happen the same way. So you have to be very careful about where you're placing your investments. And I think what's happening now, like cap rates are compressing. Like, when you're looking at apartment buildings in Toronto, people are buying cap rates of like 2 to 3%.
Oh, absolutely.
Like it's crazy, right? But the thing is, though, like when I'm looking at the buildings that I'm looking at, I'm looking at like maybe a 4.5 cap, but we're bringing it up to a 6. And it really is through but we're still in the greater Toronto area while doing it. Now, sometimes you see people out in the tertiary markets getting higher cap rates.
Right.
The challenge is that everything is in a cycle, right? So at that time in the cycle in London, you were at the down part, the slump of the cycle. Now, what happens, it always comes back. It's always a cycle. And those cap rates will snap back. So those ones who were now in the tertiary markets that are compressed now because of the lack of supply we're talking about, they're going to be the first ones to snap back to the higher cap rate later on. So you got to be careful.
Well, there's those markets that are artificially propped up, for sure. There's so many markets that are just propped up because they're bedrooms to Toronto, or even they're not bedrooms, but people just can't afford Toronto, so they move out.
Right.
But it feels to me like this one's different, and maybe people have said that before. I'm not saying we won't see corrections, and I fundamentally, as an investor, will never buy something without cash flow, because I know in a correction, if I go underwater, so to speak, the only way I'm going to be content and sleeping at night is if I know I'm cash flowing on that asset, right? It can be underwater, but if I'm cash flowing, it will come back.
And that's the point of being able to hold something over the long term. And what's happening, though, is 46% of the condos in downtown Toronto are negative cash flow.
Oh, yeah.
So what happens, right? So it's crazy. The other thing, and I wanted to share this with you, is like I wanted to share the 4 kind of horsemen of the real estate apocalypse. Kind of talk about as a topic. Like the first one. And it's for people to kind of think about over the next 12 months. What are you thinking, could really affect the market? Now, one was we're not talking about it anymore, and that's usually when you should be talking about it, is inflation. Have you heard? Inflation has been like, it's never going to happen. It's not going to happen.
It's your friend.
That's the time to start talking about it again. So I think that, if in the next 12 months we see a real sharp inflationary push, which is very possible, we have like containers and containers of Chinese goods not leaving China anymore. We have all those goods that were going from China to Vietnam and the Philippines not going there anymore. So it's there are lots of different things that can happen. So that's one thing to just keep an eye out for. The second one is pretty straightforward. It's a recession, right?
Yeah.
Now a recession, if you think about it, if you go back to all the different recessions we've seen, and we've looked at the housing market, a recession doesn't mean that house prices are going to go down. Actually, in 50% of the time, house prices have actually gone up during a recession.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not always the factor, but it's an important one to keep in mind when you're thinking about the housing market over the next 12 months. The third one is really the one that we have some control over, but not really. And that's governmental changes. The impact of governmental changes can be, crazy.
Immigration being a big one.
Well, yeah, for sure. That, and we have 100,000 people coming in and that's perfect for us for housing markets. But I'm also talking about like let's say we change the way that we tax capital gains.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say we decide that from provincially that we're going to keep rent control between tenancies, which happened in New York, right? And in New York, where they've closed the loopholes, you've seen like a 20 to 40% reduction in prices. Okay. With keeping that
on the rent controlled properties.
Right.
Yeah.
Where it, there was a couple of loopholes before, now they're not there. Right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so like this is one of those big risks, and it's, governmental risk. So that's my third horseman. Of
big risk there. Yeah. I mean, we could get into that chat, but I mean, I've seen some incredibly irresponsible stuff, and just the change in government dynamics over the years. It is noticeable, but no one's really talking about it or looking at it like they should. Yeah.
And that's the third one. Yeah. And the last one I want to say is a black swan event. Like we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
So like, talk about viruses, talk about, 9/11, talk about all the things that could happen. We don't know. And that is another thing to watch out for the next 12 months, right? So those are all of the things that, could happen, would happen. And as a real estate investor, I'm telling people to be proactive, not reactive.
Right.
Prepare yourself so that, you've created the mind space for being able to, at least go through the mental exercise. If there is inflation that happens, what does that mean to my real estate portfolio? What does that mean for interest rates?
On one hand, though, inflation is a great thing if you've got your cash flow, because inflation is your friend when it comes to, you've borrowed, 80% of your money to buy a property. Well, that means that your loan amount is technically going down in real dollars.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, from a real asset base, because it is a real asset, right? And it's a physical asset that you own. I mean, it inflates as well. But at the same time, if your expenses, like, let's use the downtown condo 47%.
Everything goes up,
right? And now you're I've had people come to me and tell me, hey, like, I need your help. I was advised to buy this property and I'm losing $2,500 a month because my mortgage rate and my mortgage and my property taxes are that much less than the actual property that I've purchased. And some of them, their prices have just come back. So from 2017, it's just come back.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that means they've been carrying that negative debt for 2 years.
Talk about a good way to not want to buy real estate anymore.
Yeah. And that's why, as we're talking about why having cash flow is important, but the cash flow is what keeps your real estate. The appreciation is what makes you wealthy. Right.
Yes.
And I like cash flow because that's what allowed me to leave my position. Right. But the real net worth accelerator comes from the appreciation of the assets that I'm owning, because I'm owning them in places that appreciate well over a long period of time. It's like I back tested to 1970.
Why don't you dig into that? I mean, I would love to talk about the economics of your area, because I've had people begging me to get somebody from the Durham region on this podcast. podcast, and no one wants to drive over here. Well, ditto. I don't want to drive over there.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If I would have known how far it was, but like, no, I'm happy to do that. I think the challenge is that there's a lot of misconceptions still in Toronto about the workforce in Oshawa and in the Durham region. It's often still thought of as like a automaker place.
Yeah.
And, back in the 1980s, we would have had maybe 20,000 people who are part of the, GM. Actually, I think it was a lot higher than that. But if you look at it proportionally today, it's less than 5,000 people, right? With still the unemployment rate at the lowest in the GTA. So and they're not even in the, I don't think they're even in the top 5 employers anymore in the region. GM, yeah. Okay. Really, it's OPG. OPG is the biggest employer in the region, in the area, and we have a lot of. I mean, it's 45 minutes to downtown Toronto, right? Yeah. Which is from Oshawa down to downtown Toronto, and people don't measure in like kilometers. They really measure in how much time it takes to do something. Yeah. Right. And so that's the key when it comes to the Durham region. So there are a lot of people who live in Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Oshawa, Clarington, which is Curtis and Bowmanville, and they work in Toronto. Because the house pricing, I mean, if you look at it, the intro house pricing is a lot lower than other areas in the GTA, but it keeps increasing along with the Toronto area.
Toronto's where you drop the rock in the pond, and then the ripples keep spreading.
That's right. That's it.
Okay, so we obviously see those ripples spreading. So you've got a couple of employers, OPG being the big one. I never like to be reliant on one employer, one industry. So that's why, to me, like Calgary and Edmonton and Alberta in general, they're just so dependent on oil. And I feel that oil really drove their prices up sort of artificially. Right. Like you look at Saskatchewan, of course, Alberta's got more going on than Saskatchewan in terms of, well, they've got a lot of tourism. People want to ski, snowboard, see the Rockies. They do have other industry there too, but I mean, I look at the GTA. We have so many corporate head offices, right in the GTA. So, like you said, they can drive in. Yeah. Other than OPG and being a bedroom to Toronto, do you see other reasons that people would want to be in Oshawa?
Oh yeah, like a lot of we are finding that a lot of people who are working in the west end of Toronto are finding jobs in the east end in the Durham region now. So they're shifting that way just to lower their commute time. But I mean, we have a lot of ministries. We have the school boards. We have the Ministry of Finance out there. Okay. We've got a lot of different employers. Still have the auto sector, UOIT, Trent University. Yeah. And there's a lot of innovation around aeronautic, and we've got the airport out there. So there's a lot of different types and a broad range. And I think what's happened over the last 10 years is they've got all the region and all the towns and cities have done a good job at diversifying away from just being in the auto sector. So that's why we have that level of unemployment, but don't have the reliance as we did before. And I think that's, something that if you talk to somebody, like I talked to someone in Toronto, they still tell me GM. Well, there's the auto sector but it's just not what it is anymore. And you have to take a deeper look. And that's why, the house prices have doubled. Like when we were buying back in 2008, the same house that we're buying for $250 is now selling for $550. Yeah.
Well, and I think that there's this. Well, when you look at our immigration, the mass amount of our immigration to Canada is most likely coming to the biggest city they've heard of in Canada, which is Toronto. Right. Yeah. And if they can't land in Toronto, where do they go? They go just outside of Toronto. Yeah. So we probably get the vast majority of our country's immigration. I haven't looked up the stat, but I feel like we probably do here in Ontario.
Oh yeah, I have looked up the stat actually. So there's about 220 that come to Ontario in general, and about 100 and just over 100 that stay in the GTA. Okay. And what happens is out in Durham, we have welcome centers. So the federal government has actually set aside welcome centers for new immigrants in Ajax, in Pickering, and I can't remember where the other one is. But so that has a centralization of all the services that a new immigrant would need, right along the GO train, actually. So it's right by the GO train station.
So that right there, I mean, as long as immigration doesn't change, you're set up in a position where you should be seeing long-term appreciation in that market.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, we've done well, and, we, when I say we, it's myself and my partners, right? Focusing on, particularly now, because it becomes more and more challenging as prices go up and rents don't keep up, in order to find assets that make sense. So I typically am finding 80% of my properties off market, right? Okay. In order to be able to get the cash flow numbers that I'm looking for. And the same with apartment buildings, that's we're what makes us different is that we're not just finding things off the MLS. It's, the relationships with realtors. It's the relationships with people on the ground, property managers. It's advertising directly to building owners. It's getting the word out that that's what we're doing. And so, in the last few weeks, I've been getting 17 unit, 21 unit, 3 9s, just working on the numbers to make sure that they work. Because even when you're dealing directly with a building owner, it doesn't mean that the deal is going to work.
Doesn't mean they'll be reasonable.
I have a friend of mine, Mark Loeffler, and he's been on the podcast too.
Mark,
so he says, oh yeah, people will give me an offer, and I just tell them some way out offer, number to buy the building, and if they want it, sure, right? And that's what you get from people as well, but it's you understanding the numbers that work for you, and then how you can transition and reposition an asset in order to increase the value of it.
Well, that's the name of the game, right? Like, to be able to reposition it. And that's funny. Like, I just made an offer on a multi right before you got here.
Cool.
So we'll see. Yeah, I asked the guy if he had a number in mind, and he said, "No, I think I'll let you just make an offer." I'm like, "What?"
All right. Well, you can always start at 1.
He says, as long as I want a 5 or 6 cap. Right. I'm like, well, that could mean a lot of things depending on how you calculate your cap rate. I know that I calculate a cap correctly. Like, I'll build in every real expense and put in when I'm doing it for myself, I might not build in management because I have my own management team, sort of. But that's the biggest thing. But I mean, just the very fact that he was willing to make that comment makes me think that he's probably going to be semi-reasonable. Because a 5 or 6 cap is downright reasonable. If he said I want a 3 or a 4, then on a fully done building.
Right. Like what town?
Hamilton.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, theoretically,
that's reasonable,
that sounds like it should be reasonable. But if he's saying, I don't manage, I don't have a snow expense, my neighbor does it, I don't have garbage removal, well, now that's no longer really a 5 or 6 cap, if that's what he's thinking.
Yeah. And I mean, that happens when you're dealing with a single owner of a single building, right? Mm-hmm. That's typical especially if they're older and they're transitioning out of owning the building. So, there's some pieces to that. But I mean, I've got a couple of examples.
Let's go through a case study.
Yeah, so this is an example of a 6 unit. So it was purchased in June of 2017 for $700,000.
Okay. So
the annual income was $67,000. The annual expenses before property management was $25,000.
Yeah.
All right, and then the initial down payment, closing costs and repairs to reposition the asset was $255,000.
Okay, so you're $255 to renovate, $700 to buy,
and no, that includes the down payment. So the partner brought in $255 in total.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So, but was it a $700 purchase price?
Yeah, it was a $700 purchase price.
I'm just gonna redirect you into my way of doing numbers.
Okay, go ahead.
Just for consistency here.
Yeah.
So you purchased for $700.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your total renovation cost?
I didn't separate it out. I've put
ballpark for me.
Let's see. I would say like 95.
95,000. That's not bad. What was this? Like a 10-plex, 6-plex?
6-plex. Yeah.
Yeah. So 95,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and that included paying some people to leave?
Yeah, we turned over some tenants.
Okay, so I like to do a calculation. So what's my purchase in So purchase and reno cost is $795. And then did you do a refi on that?
Yeah, so we refied it at $935.
Okay, so new value $935.
Yeah, we boosted the annual income from 67 up to 86.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna make a note of that. So 86,000.
Yeah.
Income. Okay, so 935 is your appraised value, and what did you get? 75% of that?
Yeah.
Okay, so 75%.
So we're up to about around 700 for the mortgage.
Okay. So new mortgage is about 701 ballpark. And then I'm going to go ahead and subtract off what you paid. And it looks like you're about a $93,000 net investment ish.
Yeah. And so that's after the refi, and it cash flows about $1,400 a month plus the mortgage pay down on that.
Okay, so $1,400 cash flow, which works out to be
that's for both of us together.
Yeah, that's the total. I'm not doing any split here. Yeah. So, and then you've got appreciation. We'll just call it we'll call it 3% appreciation.
Sure.
I like to just do kind of a ballpark. So if your new value is $935, you're going up at that's $28,000 of appreciation a year, and I think that's believable too in that area.
Sure. Yeah.
You could be more conservative, but I think that's reasonable. And then mortgage pay down. Do you have a number for your mortgage pay down?
Not off the top of my head.
You're a 25-year amortization, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to be around 3% on that, maybe even a bit more. But I'll just go.
You're a 3%er guy.
It's just easy, all right.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not accurate, but it's reasonably accurate. It's not exact. Okay, so that's 21,000.
Yeah.
And so 65,887 is 1 year's return. If we do a little division there, your ROI on that property is ridiculous. And I like that it's a multi because you're just kind of getting scale on your efforts. Yeah, you're about 70% return on investment.
Yeah, and annually, right?
Annually.
Yeah, but the thing is that's one example. They're not all like that. I typically, like when I do a building, I typically am telling my partners that it takes 3 to 5 years to reposition an asset. I've done it in a year. Like this is that 6 is an example of that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't so I've got 2 other examples. I'll give you one that's just recent. So, and then we can do this together. So the purchase price for it's a 12 unit. We purchased again off market, 1.75 million.
Okay, 175.
And we've already raised the rents on that $2,000 a month.
Okay.
Right. So that's 24 a year. And let's say, we use if we use the CMHC cap rate method, let's say we call it 5%, although people are buying at 4%.
Yeah.
We'll use 5%. That's adding about $500,000 in value to the property.
Yeah. So just with what you did, $500,000, that was just by increasing rent, or did you have to do some cosmetic rent?
No, we did a little bit of renovations. We did an above guideline increase, and we work with some tenants to do some turnover and continue to own that asset. Now this is part of a 3-year plan. We haven't even got to the first year yet, and this is
so you're still in the first year. You've already added $500,000 in value. Have you spent $500,000?
No, we've spent I would say maybe 30,000.
30,000 to create 500,000 in value.
Yeah.
That's what I love about this game of real estate.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And it's different. Like you're playing in a different ballpark here, right? As opposed to where you are when you're doing the 2 to 4 units, it is a different ballpark for sure, and the risk is different. So I got another example of a 7 unit. We could keep going, but you get the idea.
No,
right?
I got your idea, and we've got people who come on and talk about this kind of thing. I like that it's on a larger scale. So you're financing these through the commercial lending department at the banks or credit unions.
Actually, this is a VTB. So this,
or you get a really good VTB.
Yeah, so I got the 12 is a first VTB. I've got an 11 11 closing in 2 weeks, and it's a first VTB as well.
Yeah.
So like it's working and talking to people and educating them, and it takes time to find these deals, right? And there's a risk, right? Because like I have to put money into the finding of it, and then let's say I go through a phase 1 and there's a problem,
like an environmental study.
Yeah.
So you're paying for the environmental study.
I'm doing
on the
it anyways, yeah, just because I don't want to end up with an issue when I go to refinance, right?
Especially this one with the VTB.
Yeah.
You really got to be careful. And for those who don't know, phase 1 environmental is something that a bank is going to ask for when you go to refinance, and they want to know there's no contamination.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you have a VTB, it's not necessary to do that because you have a VTB.
Or private financing. But then you go back to the bank has a problem. Now you've forever got a problematic property.
Yeah. And
I had a friend that wanted to buy a contaminated former auto mechanic shop. And it had phase 3 done, and it said, you need to remediate. And he bought it privately, private mortgage, but then he couldn't do anything with it. He couldn't get rid of it. Remediation would have cost too much. So, it just wasn't a great investment for him.
No, yeah, you have to be very careful when you're playing in this space. I mean, if you thought the costs were a lot in single family and duplexes, like this could be extreme, right?
Yeah, you can spend $20,000 before you even close.
That's right. Yeah,
depends on the deal.
Phase 1, phase 2, like phase 2 could be 16,000, right? Plus phase 1 of like 3,000-4,000, so that's 20, and you haven't even done like any inspections
so
or
you're into 20
engineers and anything.
And then
like
if you need remediation on top of that.
Yeah. So I mean that's always the challenge, right? When it comes to dealing in the space, but the benefit is the upside. And that's why, when the way that I position this is if you can do it, go and do it. And that's why we have a club. That's why we have education. Go and do it. The way that I'm doing it, and when I'm looking for partners, is somebody who wants hands off, knows and trusts me, and we go through that process.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when you're in your experience, when you're going back to the bank, what are they asking for? Of course, they want to see a phase 1 or phase 2 clean. They want to know no further work required.
Right.
They're going to want to see. Do they want to see a structural report? And when do they start asking for that?
If there's an issue, like I haven't had a bank come back to me and ask for a structural report, although I've always, especially if I'm dealing with an older building, I will I have an engineer that I work with, and I'll bring them out and pay him to have a look and give me a report. Whether I think that there's an issue or not, especially with the building, I don't want to take a chance. So,
and you're paying a couple $1,000 for that, probably
getting it done. Well, I mean, I have a lot of good relationships with people, so it doesn't always cost me the same as everybody else. But I'm making sure that it's done properly, and and that's the benefit of having done this for so long and having those, when I say I'm going to do something, I do it, right? It's a very much a trust factor with me. Like, I said that I'm going to come here today. When I realized how far it was, I still ended up coming.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's great. No, I'm glad I tricked you into coming down here. Okay. So you're typically getting asked for your environmental, and this is probably mostly when you get into that multi-million price range that they're going to start asking for this stuff consistently.
Yeah.
I've been like, from the broker world, on the stuff under $1 million, they would usually just say an environmental questionnaire was enough.
Right.
But then, later on, if you get into the bigger numbers, I can see them asking for it. What else are they, what else would you want to note about that process going through the commercial refi with these multi-unit buildings?
What's really important? Well, the exit strategy is really important, right? So, when we're talking about going in, we always try to come up with 3 different ways to exit anything that we get into. And
Me too.
It's always important because if you can't get out of it, then you're stuck. Like that guy who got the gas station, right?
Yeah.
And didn't do enough due diligence, and it's always being greedy or not doing enough due diligence that gets people in trouble, right?
Or impatient.
And it comes from the greedy.
Yeah.
So and it's usually a combination of both of them together. But I think with regards to the apartment buildings on the refinance, it's important to try to get financing that makes sense for the long term, and good exit would be CMHC financing.
Yeah, and
right. on a building.
Right. So you're looking at probably a 5% fee from CMHC to do that, and they're going to add it to your mortgage.
Right.
But what are the benefits then?
Well, it's the amortization and the term, right? And the interest rate.
Yeah.
So your amortization, like on an apartment building, typically when you're dealing with bank financing, they're going to go like 25-year am. Some will even go lower to 20. But like if you're going to get CMHC financing, you can get 30, 35, 40-year amortization, which is incredible.
Well, that could be the difference between cash flow and no cash flow.
Right. And you get sub 3%, interest rates, and you get a term that you can pass on to the next building owner, right?
So you can pass the CMHC insurance on.
It's a very interesting process, right? So it becomes almost an asset as part of the building. So, but the challenge is getting it, and then the cap rates.
Yeah.
Because their cap rates are not, like if you're thinking that you're going to get a cap rate the same as what it actually is not going to happen.
No, so they say CMHC you can get 85% loan to value, but it's based on their flawed calculation. So you're not really. So it's not really a loan to value benefit. Yeah. Like, would you say even though they say it's 85%, you really just end up at 75% like you would have?
It depends. I have a friend of mine in Saskatchewan that has a really good relationship that, you're able to work with CMHC, and, that's possible that you could push that value up with, the proper comps and, kind of sharing that, but it's not the regular person that can do that. I don't want to say that it is what it is, because it's not. You get what you are willing to negotiate and how far you're willing to push back and what you're willing to do. I don't know how many times I've been told that I can't do something only to be able to do it.
Yeah. No, that's true. Like that's the key, is when you're told that you can't, that you persist. Have you done one like start to finish with CMHC?
No. That's the key, right? We've refinanced out of the lenders that we were into bank lending, but not into the CMHC product. Yeah, it's all based on the final component of it.
I know I've heard brokers say they just really don't like going down that road because it takes forever and there's all kinds of red tape, and it just becomes such a hassle that they don't even want to deal with that. Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm looking for people who have done it, and I think there are probably a lot.
Yeah. I had a gentleman, Michael Dominguez, and him with a couple of others together did it on a 9-plex, and they actually did a presentation. We recorded it on doing it. Nice. And I mean, having gone through it and everything, the positives and negatives of it, and really it comes down to what you're willing to withstand in order to get that done.
Well, it's one heck of a treat once you got it, because a 40-year amortization and a lower interest rate, now all of a sudden something that might not have had any cash flow at all could have an abundance of it.
Yeah, that's right. And it makes sense for an apartment building, right? So we're in the process of doing that right now on a 7-unit. So it'll be interesting to see how that, pans out. But again, it's a long process that takes time.
Yeah. What are you figuring? Like if you were to give somebody advice on how much time to budget, what would you say?
Like 9 months.
9 months. Yeah. I was going to say a year. Yeah. But okay. So a long time. Commercial financing to begin with takes forever. Yeah. There's just there's so much wait time, lag back and forth. Oh, just get us this, and this, and then we'll review it. When I was brokering them, I would find that, start to finish, I'd be into like 4 months, and I'm like, oh my, it just goes on.
It's not reasonable to, some of the financing requirements that, if you're trying to get a deal done in 30 days, like let's say you got
the 30-day financing condition is a joke on commercial. There's no way you're getting a 30-day done.
Not from a bank.
Not from a bank. You can do private in a week, right? Yeah. So, hey, if that's all you want to do, just do a week long.
Yeah, but like with regards to that's often the challenge too with loan to value, right? Because even if you do get the 30 days and, you thought you were going to get 70%, 75% loan to value, and they come back at 60%, 65%, like all of a sudden you're into it for, a couple $100,000 more, right?
Important point you're bringing up. With these crazy cap rates, the banks aren't going to just give you more. If you can't cover their debt coverage ratio, they're just going to cut back your loan to value and you have to put in more cash.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So the days of being able to get 75%, if building owners are going to ask these ridiculous numbers, you're going to have trouble. Yeah. That's why for me, when my mindset is go in with the intention of just renovating, hopefully borrow either a VTB or private money going in, get what you need, and then come back with the bank after.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you how you find your deals. Could you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly working on new processes and systems to do that. But basically, you know, I'm known enough so that people will refer me. You know, and it's often having that good relationship with contractors, other people that are out there. You know, what you can do to help them to do what they need to do, and then, you know, they can help you, right? So sometimes it's, you know, maybe an electrician, it could be like a plumber, it could be someone like that.
And do you ask them,
managers.
You put out some feelers, say, hey guys, I'm looking for this, can you keep an eye?
Yeah, especially if you've been working with them for a while, you want to make sure that you let people know, hey, look, and if I do close on the property, I'm happy to throw you like a, you know, $500 or $1,000, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, you just want to make sure that people know that you're trying to buy properties, right? And you know, it's getting yourself out there. It's the same with, you know, partnering. Like if people don't know that you're, if you're available for to do a partnership, then like you know. Because you're not telling them, right?
Oh, correct.
Yeah. And so it's the same thing with leads and lead generation, right? It's about getting out there. It's about not doing the same thing as everybody else, right? If you're waiting on the MLS to get a deal, you're going to be like, you know, competing with a whole bunch of other people who are trying to do the same thing,
right?
And you're all rushing out to get to the house at the same time, and you want to be the first person, especially when you get into the market that we're in now, which is very much. This is end of February 2020. It very much feels like the beginning of 2017, where we have that lack of supply, multiple offers. You're getting like 20 offers on properties, and then you got to be careful if you're the winner of a 20 multiple offer. You know,
isn't really a winner.
Like, you got to be careful, right? Yeah. So, and it's understanding your numbers and making sure it works and that you can function and hold that asset over the long term, right?
Yeah, I don't get very excited for the big bidding wars and the on-market stuff. It's not that you can't find a great deal on market, because you can. It's just there's always going to be that person that's willing to pay too much.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's really a time versus money scenario, right? So if you're willing to put more time into it, you know, and be able to put more effort into it, even more money into the process of finding it, you're more likely to find something offline. But if you want to save the money and save your time, just go on the MLS. But you're not going to get the same value proposition. So, and that's always how it's been, right? When it comes to deals and it comes to finding properties that make sense.
So do you have a daily like procedure that you do to reach out to people and you know, something that you've built into your systems that helps generate those leads?
Yeah, I've had a lot of coaching myself as well as doing coaching, but I've had a lot of coaching, and I do a weekly plan where I actually have a structured plan that I do with the items that I'm working on this week, finding, funding, and financing properties each week. I have a structured program that I actually put together, and I have all my coaching clients do the same thing. And basically, it's just going through, you know, what am I doing this week for each of those things? Because if you're not, you're going to end up with one of those roadblocks. All real estate investors end up in the same thing. Either they're not finding deals, they're not finding funding for deals, or they're not able to finance a deal. It happens to everybody one time or another. So it's important to do that every week. So yes, I'm definitely doing that every week, and I have a structure to what I do. And it comes from experience and a lot of different programs. I mean, I think I spent $20,000 this year just on different types of professional development and learning and personal development, and kind of, you know, I read probably 3 to 5 books a month, right? And I listen to Audible. I've got a large Audible library as well, right? So, you know, it's always continuing to learn and grow. But from a lead generation perspective, it really is, you know, doing a lot of different things, not just doing one thing, right? I'm not a realtor, and I'm not a mortgage broker. I'm not a property manager, in that I don't manage properties for other people. But what I am is a connector, right? And that's I would say is, you know, one of my my great abilities is to connect with and to different people, and reaching out, and I'm sure if you ask people my name, they'll probably know it in the industry, if not between 1 and 3 people, right? Because it's just being a connector and being out there and trying to help people, right? And I don't pretend to know everything. I'm still learning. It's all part of what I do. But all I do is if I tell you something, then I do it, right? I do what I say. That's all.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you've kind of given us a little bit of a taste of how you're finding your deals. Right. We've talked about how you're financing. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of what the next logical step in the discussion is here. Actually, you know what? One of the things that I'm curious about is your ability to delegate.
Right.
You talked about the mindset of people who think results versus the people who think dollars per hour.
Right.
How do you find people you can delegate to? Because you said you've in-housed your management.
Right.
I have my own company and I do delegate, and I even with stuff like this podcast, it's there's always management that comes into delegating work to people, and I'm wondering how you manage it and how you find good people and how that works for you.
So part of my weekly framework is actually, I have 3 Ds in the framework: do, delegate, and dump. Right. Mm-hmm. I'm constantly working on my processes and systems. So, have a focus that this day I'm working on process and systems, and so that I can delegate that to somebody else or take that process off my plate. And it's about continually working on that and having different people to do different things, whether it's somebody who can drive and pick something up or drive and look at properties for you, or it's a VA who can handle the incoming utilities, or it's an assistant that can help you with the more day-to-day administrative components of it. So it's having all the different people who are part of your team to get them to do, maybe it's the showing of properties, maybe it's the tenant placement, maybe it's like a handyman. All of those people are all part of it, and it's making sure that you just create a process and a system to be able to help them to do that. And then that way you have a way to check on it, right? Because you have that process and system in place.
Right.
And then for you, then it may not be you following up on that process and system. It may be somebody else on your team that's doing that, but you're giving that responsibility to somebody else. And so you need to, you're holding them accountable. Mm-hmm. for this particular task, and they're reporting back to you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that delegation and but including that in your weekly plan or your quarterly plan, right?
Including like next steps with that, or how I can further delegate. Yeah,
like making sure that you're working on the processes and systems in your business, especially the things that you don't like doing. Mm-hmm. So. What was it so one of the things that we had recently in a conversation with a coaching client was he wasn't happy with how he was doing all the incoming call management for repairs.
Right.
For his business. So what we worked on was, okay, well, what are the things you don't like this? So how can we set up a process and a system to deal with it? So, he created a matrix of these are the trades. I have 2 or 3 trades for every particular problem. These are the most common problems that I have. And then we have a VA that's going to handle all the calls that come in and then assign them directly. And then we have a template, like a property management type software, like project management software, actually, that helps to okay, this has been assigned to this person and it's already been done, right? Okay. And the accountability piece is being able to look at the project management software and see that it's been assigned. Yeah. Right. And so it's those pieces, creating those pieces that help you do. Right. And most people are always stuck kind of doing everything and not taking the time to work on the bigger picture kind of pieces. And so when you do that and you make it part of your weekly, tasks, then that's where.
Yeah. To work on your businesses and your tasks. Rather than work in your business.
Yeah. It's kind of cliche. I know we hear it all the time, but it's very true.
Totally.
Yeah. It's very true. If we don't do this, then all we're going to end up, we can keep busy because we have the time. It'll just envelop you, right?
That's the funny thing. Like you take on more and you think it's okay, and then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of things that come with it, and that's kind of what I've experienced. I want to be able to say yes to all these things, but then that makes me put a microscope on everything else I got going on and how I can systemize it so that I'm not involved. And with my property management in-housing specifically, like all of my utilities are all just auto withdrawal. So I just look at them, when I'm doing my taxes pretty much, or if I see a really astronomical number in my email notification. Things like plumbing and heating and all that stuff. Like I just send my tenants like an entry email that says, here's procedures for the house. If you got a problem with that, here's who you call. And they actually have a number and they call my plumbing and heating company directly and I just get billed. So things like that actually help me. They're emergency, they'll do middle of the night. I don't get a call. I'm like, you got a pipe burst? You don't call me, you call the plumbing and heating company. And because what am I going to do? I'm an hour and a half from my properties. So there's nothing I'm going to do in the middle of the night that they can't do by just calling the company. So I've created some systems that really help, but there's definitely more that need to happen. And particularly stuff that has sensitive information, password protected things, I've had a stranglehold on. Right. Which that's probably been my biggest challenge to relinquish some of that.
Maybe you need somebody more local who's like beside you who can take on some of those roles.
Yeah, where I can keep a close eye and
and then relinquish some of that. It's trust, but it's also like trust but verify, right?
Yeah, trusted and verified.
Yeah. But I mean, like if you take what you're doing this week, for example, and you just write a list of the things that you're not really crazy about doing, and let's say you end up with a list of 5. Yeah. If you just spent, like 2 or 3 hours working on one of those 5, what would your next week be like? Right. Okay. And I mean, you would have alleviated 20% of the things that
were bothering
you.
Okay, so if it's on my list, I really don't like it. I started doing that today. I had a couple of things that just been lingering there. I'm like, this is just a pain in the butt. Finally got to it. So yeah, today's kind of been that day for me. Actually, up to this point, you arrived at 11:30 a.m. So I had a productive morning, I suppose.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But anyways, I don't want to drag this on too much past an hour because I know we could talk quite a bit.
Oh, it's been an hour already? Holy cow.
I know, I make it fly by, don't I?
Yeah.
No, I think you did. You're very articulate and you provided a ton of value here. So everyone listening, definitely give this one another listen. Quentin said tons of stuff that will definitely help you in your business. Quentin, where should people reach out to you or how should they find out more about you?
Yeah, so if you visit durhamrei.ca, there are some of the I've got some other tools on there I've got a property checklist that you can use to find deals, like what is a real deal, and they can kind of check that out. Also information about tenants and how you can do some tenant management. So there's a few tools on the Durham REI website for them to take a look at. And the blog has some articles. Oh, yeah. If you're interested in my thinking,
more content.
Yeah, there's more content on there on that website as well. I've got some good graphics that I help to, take people down a path of learning.
Yeah, and I know we didn't dig into Durham REI, but that's your educational meetup that you host.
Yeah, it's how I give back, right? It's really me organizing a community of people who are very active investors. Like we have a real active community of people. Actually, I would stop doing it if I didn't have people who had more than, I've got some people in there that have over 100 properties themselves.
That's awesome.
And if I didn't have those people in that group, I probably wouldn't continue to run it because I get inspired by listening to them too. And it's important for me, right? I mean, I go to different places to get inspired too across the country, but I also want to have a group of active people who are doing things and not just talking about it. So
that's what it's all about. I actually got that from you. I kind of implemented that at my meetup. I'm like, if you're not going to do stuff,
get out of here.
Get out of here. Not said in those words.
I say that.
Yeah. But we got people who come and it's great because you hear that, we're thinking about doing a deal, or we were on the fence about it, and next meeting they've done one.
Oh,
and,
good. That's
it's really
good.
nice to hear that. Ours is we don't do the education piece. I consider the podcast the education piece, and then the meetup is just the talking, networking, which I really enjoy. It gives me a chance to like just talk to so many people.
It's really, I mean, it's very popular. Like people would really want to come out to just meet other people and
people
learn
who are
what they're
doing it, right?
Yeah.
Because think about how many people, like 1% of our population are real estate investors, probably.
Yeah.
Like it's very small in the grand scheme of things.
Small, maybe a couple.
But in my
yeah.
circles, everyone's talking about real estate all the time, and it almost feels weird when you find people who aren't investors sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's why when I go out to parties with people who aren't real estate investors, the conversation just ends up being about real estate anyway, unless they're really not into it, and then we don't have much to say.
Yeah, you got to be at the right parties, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, so you mentioned you go to Belize. I know you were just coming back there from there, right?
Well, I was in Kelowna a week ago. I was meeting with some really great real estate investors from across Canada through a group, the Entrepreneur Organization that I'm part of, and then the week before that, I was in Belize with we're looking at some properties out there and having some fun and just boat rides and like sushi on the beach. It was really cool.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah. When I went to Costa Rica, I'm like, I need to find a way to own some property here. Give me a reason to come down.
Yeah. No, yeah. I've got property in Florida. So we've got a few units and properties down there, and it's a hedge against the Canadian economy and US dollars coming in, and it's a way for me to one of the four horsemen to hedge against.
Makes sense. Yeah, you want to diversify. So Quentin, I absolutely appreciated this. It was really fun, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers are going to get a lot of value out of it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for hosting me.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for watching today's episode. Just a friendly reminder to please rate and review this podcast on iTunes. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you smash the like and subscribe and notification bell. And also leave a comment. And hey, while you're at it, why not share this episode with somebody you think it could help? It helps this podcast grow, and I would really appreciate it. Thanks again. We'll see you on the next episode.